Thank you very much indeed for this conference. And I would start by saying that much of the debate about nuclear energy seems to me to be conducted at the strategic, national, and on the whole economic level. But it also affects communities and people, and I want to focus today, or our attention, on the implications for localities and communities, because that is a major issue, and I think in terms of the current debates tends to be being neglected. And I speak from the perspective of someone who's worked both at national level and local level in local government and with government committees and so on, and I currently lead a campaign group called BANG, which is Blackwater Against New Nuclear Group. I hope you'll try and join us before the day is out. And this is opposing the proposed Chinese investment into nuclear reactors in Essex on the Blackwater estuary. So I do tend to look at this both from a national and a local perspective. And I've called this talk The Legacy of Nuclear Power, which follows a book that I've just published. And if anybody's interested in that book, there are leaflets at the back on the outside desk which will draw your attention to it. Nuclear power, I think we all have concluded, at least in the West, is on the wane, even in the United Kingdom. But nuclear power takes a long time to depart. And it is a long, lingering and painful process, and I think most of us do not know what is ultimately going to happen. It is shored up still, especially in the UK, by a coalition of interests. Political interests, labour interests, by which I mean workers, the scientific community, the nuclear community, and above all, perhaps, the military community. And it is uncertain how long and where it will actually end. In brief, what's wrong with nuclear power? I can tick these things off very quickly because there will no doubt be recurrent themes of the day. First of all, it is insecure. Quite aside from the idea that somehow this is a secure form of energy, it's dependent on foreign investment. It is linked to the military. There are dangers of proliferation and diversion, terrorism attacks and so on, and accidents which are recurrent and which are, as Charles Perrow long ago said, normal events. We should not think that somehow a Fukushima is exceptional. Every generation, at least, we have a major event with catastrophic consequences, and they are, one might argue, statistically and empirically, an inevitability. They're not something that doesn't happen. So it's insecure, it's unsafe. The health risks have been already alluded to, and although there is contention over this, I think the conclusion is that it does have health impacts, and these impacts, and indeed the impacts we've just learned about on plants and animals to the environment, are very important. So it is unsafe. It is an inflexible form of power in the sense that the idea that somehow this keeps the lights on as part of the energy mix is faintly risible. I mean, when do the lights actually go off? And if they do, it's more likely to be as a result of the failure of nuclear power, as happened in Japan, than it is over other matters. So it is very inflexible, and if it develops, it is unreliable. There is a lock-in, and we could get to the situation where we have nuclear power competing against renewables, and which is going to have to give way? Probably renewables, because of the built-in prices and so on that are there with nuclear power. It is frankly an economic disaster area. And lastly, it's unsustainable. There is an environmental problem with nuclear energy, which is often compared. It's seen as a solution, would you believe, to climate change. We've got to save the planet. The argument of the nuke people is, therefore, we've got to have nuclear energy because it is a low-carbon form of energy and it will give us baseload power and so on. Both those arguments, I think, are bogus, but especially the argument about somehow nuclear energy is a difficult thing to have, but it is for a greater global benefit. Because actually, nuclear energy, if you think about it, nuclear power, is connected to weapons, and obviously we're at the CND conference today, and let's not forget that link as we proceed. You have such things as accidents, the bomb, and indeed things like Fukushima and Chernobyl, which give a dimension to nuclear energy which is potentially catastrophic. And if it does happen, of course, it would happen at once and would have immense impacts, regional, possibly global. And climate change is a slowly developing process. The catastrophe of nuclear energy can be immediate. And therefore, I would say it is a moral issue in its own right. We should not see it as somehow a moral conscience saving us from the world, because it is powerful enough to destroy the world and therefore is itself a major moral issue. And I ask you to forget these arguments about it being a solution to climate change. So what is this legacy I'm talking about? Well, first of all, it's a physical legacy. It's fairly obvious, I think. It's in the buildings, in contamination, in wastes, in wastelands that have developed across the world. And a lot of this legacy arises through routine, but also accidental and deliberate activities. And it creates what I would call landscapes of risk. And it is not simply, and it also has around it communities and people. So it's not just a physical legacy, it is a social legacy. And we need to focus on that, because that seems to me pretty well the terminal argument against nuclear energy. Now, if I could have my sequence of slides. The next one, please. Could I have the next one? A button, is there? No, which button is that? Sorry, I wasn't... what? The black one? There's not a black one. Sorry. Oh, that one, I see. So, and which one do I press? Okay, fine. Sorry. Oh, right. I'll go back. So I want to talk first about one nuclear landscape that I know particularly well, which is Hanford in the northwest of the United States. It is a huge reservoir, a huge reservation, the size of Bedfordshire and bigger, half the size of Rhode Island. Absolutely massive, in a bend in the Columbia River in the eastern part of Washington state. And its history is, it was part of the Manhattan Project, one of the three sites which developed nuclear weapons during the war. In fact, Hanford was responsible for the development and production of plutonium. That was the plutonium base both during the war and during the Cold War in the United States. So that is the plants that were being developed during wartime. 50,000 people were on that site, and it was there for 2.5 years to develop the bomb, which eventually, of course, had catastrophic effects in 1945. But it was almost a heroic movement of assembling that number of people, that kind of technology, etc., on that site. Those were the sort of barrack-like accommodation in which people lived, segregated on the side of the Columbia River there. Absolutely colossal, transforming what was a semi-desert area pretty well overnight in a massive logistical operation. But what was it doing? It was producing Fat Man. Fat Man was the bomb which ultimately was set on Nagasaki. The second of the bombs was the plutonium bomb. And this is a not particularly easy photograph to see, but that is of the devastation of Nagasaki in August 1945, pretty well at the termination of the Second World War. And this was how it was heralded in Hanford, which became a sort of almost heroic site. It was our bombs. It is atomic bombs. They had no idea what they had been doing until it was revealed on that day by President Roosevelt. And as somebody put it to me, you can never feel that proud again. That was the kind of emphasis that were coming out of that production period. Since then, there's been the Cold War, and a massive legacy has been left. It was stuff was just tipped around, flown over and sprayed from the air and so on, in a most calamitous way in the 2-3 decades after the war, during the arms race with the USSR. And so Hanford has been left with a contaminated landscape and with a massive cleanup operation. This is the legacy of nuclear energy. It is not something that's here today, gone tomorrow. It goes on for generations. And these are some of the efforts at dealing with the Hanford issue. I quickly show you Chernobyl. This is the deserted town there, and also here's another picture of the Fukushima accident, to demonstrate that there are landscapes of risk. I mean, Hanford is almost a deliberate one. These are those that have arisen as a result of accidents. Coming to a more familiar area, Sellafield. Sellafield also has massive legacy on a much more compressed site, only 2 square miles, but loads of facilities at Sellafield, and we know that it is one of the most contaminated and dangerous places in Western Europe. This is just one picture of one of the ponds in which stuff was dumped immediately after the war as Sellafield was being developed, which has left them with an immensely difficult problem of cleanup, and therefore Sellafield remains and will remain for probably decades to come the central physical problem in the United Kingdom. We should not forget that when we are talking about new developments and so on. Sellafield is the issue here and now, and cleanup is the big problem. Very briefly, I move now to Gorleben in Germany, and you'll see in the woods there, the River Elbe to the north, there is both a salt mine headworks on the right and an intermediate level and a store for high-level wastes and a conversion centre on the left. But that is not completed, it's been stopped. And although the nuclear industry has put its imprint on Gorleben, which is the totemic site in Germany, that is the area over which there has been struggle for 30 to 40 years. And as a result of that struggle, in the end, Gorleben no longer is taking casks, the big Castor casks from France and other places, and no longer is the mine being developed as a potential laboratory and repository. Okay. Yes, okay, I've got that. So what we have is these communities are on the periphery. They are, the communities I'm talking about are places that are remote, they're economically marginal, politically powerless, and also environmental risk. They are places that are vulnerable. And they are places that are there and will stay there by a process of what I call peripheralization. There are power relations which mean that they attract and at the same time repel, and other places will not take it. So we do have nuclear landscapes now with communities around them that are not likely to change in the future. And that brings about an intergenerational impact. This goes on down the generations. And the problem we have in our society is, what do we do about the nuclear waste that we currently have? It is an almost unmanageable situation, but we know we have to manage it. And at the moment, the only way we can manage it is to have it stored safely as possible and to keep on renewing the stores, etc., etc. Now, we all know that the possibility of deep disposal is there, but it's actually going nowhere at the moment. And in any case, even if we do find a place to put a repository, and if we do agree that that is the way to manage it, it is not going to happen for a long time. And therefore, my argument would be the problem is here and now, and the solution is here and now for the next 2-3 generations at least. And so what the hell are we doing thinking about new nuclear power stations, which would bring new wastes, spent fuel, onto sites around our country, like Bradwell, which I've been campaigning against, low on sea level, very, very vulnerable sites, and stuff being stored. We don't know what we would do with it, and it is left to people in the next century and beyond to somehow manage it in increasing, deteriorating circumstances. We don't need nuclear power. Therefore, it is unnecessary to build these new nuclear stations. And my final argument would be that a legacy is about to be left, if we go forward with this, of a dangerous, unknowable, uncertain, and unpredictable nature. It's a moral issue of big dimensions, and one which I hope will come to the forefront of debates about nuclear power in the future.